module na isinend sa inyo is actually ano ba tawag doon? It's based on mostly based kay Barlow. Okay? So I just want you to see rin kung paano i-present nung ni Butcher yung abnormal psychology in a way. So that at least kung sakali gusto niyo rin nabasahin in the future, you can also do that. So there are 38 in class as of right now, so we can begin there. All right, so good afternoon. We will be talking about an overview of abnormal psychology. And this particular text, as I've said earlier, is based on the presentation of, based on the textbook of Butcher and Hooley. So as we begin the class and also the topics that we are presenting, I would like you to see the table of specifications ng board examinations for psychometricians. At dito ninyo makikita yung mga outcomes that are needed that are needed to be measured from people who would like to be saglit medyo na-distract ako sa mga pumapasok. Ayan. All right. As I said, this represents the outcomes that are being asked from people who would like to become psychometricians in the future. And also, magiging background nyo rin ito pagdating sa if ever that you would like to take board examinations for psychologists in the future. As you would see here, ang mga kinakailangan sa inyo as psychometricians or board takers in the future is that you should be able to compare and contrast pathological from non-pathological manifestations of problem behaviors, meaning you would need to have a particular understanding of abnormal behavior and their progression, also causes, etiology, and all that. So that particular understanding, medyo hindi kayo makakaano dito, hindi ninyo to makukuha tong outcome na to. That's why, apart from the two textbooks that we're using for this class, I, in a way, nire-request ko rin sa inyo that you should be able to get a copy of your DSM-5 because you will not be only using that here in this class. Kung hindi, magagamit nyo rin yun in the future for your intro to clinical psychology and if ever that you would like to take the board and if you would like to take your master's in the future or if you would like to go into the field of medicine and you would like to specialize in psychiatry. Okay? Another would be that you should be able to differentiate, distinguish and identify common psychological disorders on the basis of specific symptoms. Precisely the reason why we have a case analysis in this particular class, so that you will be able to see kung paano pagda-diagnose based on the symptoms that are observed from our service users. Okay, and if you would like, you can now start reading about the different the different disorders in the DSM-5, or you can browse your textbooks because there are some cases there, and also nakalagay din doon yung mga specific na criterion that were lifted from the DSM-5. Okay, Also, in this particular session, if you have questions, you can let me know if you would if you have questions, or if I'm going too fast or something like that. Kung ano man ang problem, just let me know, okay? So that at least aware ako sa mga nangyayari. Are we clear?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
All
Yes,
right.
Po,
sir.
sir.
So in the third one, we have the assessment and explanation of how physiological problems are caused and how they develop using psychological theories and models. This is the reason why we said that you need a background in theories of personality for you to be able to understand abnormal psychology properly. Because there are some different theories and models that explains the development of abnormal behavior. And also, it would show you it would give you a proper background on how to assess abnormality and how they progress, and you will be able to explain them properly. And when you are able to do that, you will be able to come up with a particular intervention that is fit for that abnormal behavior based on a certain theoretical background. As you would also see here, um, we are not going to look at abnormal behavior from only one aspect. We are going to look at it from the psychodynamic, behavioral, cognitive, and humanistic phenomena, and even other emerging schools of thoughts in psychology. The evaluation and analysis of specific mental behavioral disorders following the biomedical model. Actually, it's not particularly the biomedical model. It would be the biopsychosocial model, because we are going to look into the biology of the individual, and also we are going to look into the psychology of the individual, or the psyche of the individual. And also we are going to look into the social aspect that affects abnormal behavior in the individual. But also, we will need to understand that there are some abnormal behavior that are affected by the environment where they are observed. That's why we also need to see the traditional sociocultural beliefs and the multi-path theory. And in the end, we need to be able to apply ethical principles and standards in the assessment and diagnosis of abnormal behavior. This is actually quite basic. It's required in every aspect of psychology that you should have a really a deep understanding of what is ethical practice. Okay, now let's let's move on to the next. So of course, we would need to start our discussion by defining what is abnormal psychology. In a way, it's quite simple. I think this would be very basic on your part. So we would see that abnormal psychology is, or the concern of abnormal psychology is with the understanding of the nature, causes, and treatment of mental disorders. As you would see here, it talks about treatment also. But then, as I said in the introduction to the class, sabi natin, hindi tayo magfo-focus muna dun sa treatment, because that should be a subject of another course, which is Introduction to Clinical Psychology. So we would turn our focus into nature and causes. However, we may touch on the treatment and some other aspects or controversies in the treatment, or emerging thoughts in the treatment, because that would also give us a particular insight on how the current clinicians view the nature and causes of abnormality. Sa totoo lang kasi, kaya tayo the reason why we are coming up with a particular course of action or treatment is because we believe that that particular course of action or treatment would be the best for the abnormal, would be the best uh, intervention for the abnormal behavior. And we will be able to explain that because we view that particular abnormal behavior coming from a particular viewpoint. Example dyan, kapag ka biological model ang viewpoint mo ng abnormal behavior, definitely your treatment would be on the biological side. Kung psychological side siya ang view mo ng abnormal behavior, definitely ang magiging treatment mo would be on the psychological side. So, kung integration naman ng biopsychosocial model or biopsychosocial model ang iyong ginagamit, so definitely your intervention would also include biological, psychological, and social aspects. So, nakikita nyo yung konteksto dahil yung treatment ninyo is determined by the way you see the abnormality. That's why we need to see abnormality from a very broad viewpoint. Are we clear on that?
Yes po.
All right.
Opo.
Okay. Hindi na ako mag-mute kung ako ay iinom, ano bang tawag dito, or mag-burp or something like that. Just please understand na medyo ano siya, hassle on my part na nagkiklik pa ako kung sakali. Now, let's go into the reasons why do we need to study abnormal here on your screen a particular description of a case. And I'll give you around 30 seconds to read it. At inom muna ako saglit. Ayan. So this shows Gary, who is 27 years old. And what are the symptoms that he reported? Sabi niya, siya ay nahihilo, nagpapawis yung kanyang kamay. He's experiencing heart palpitations and some ringing in his ear. So what did he do? Apart from that, he experienced dry throat and constant edgy and watchful feeling. Remember, as you would notice, ito ay parang, ano ba yung mga symptoms na to? It looks like parang meron siyang something like that. Pero titingnan niyo, kanino siya unang nag-consult? Well, because of the dizziness, heart palpitations, and some ringing in his ears, ang kinonsult niya muna, of course, neurologist, so that malaman kung is there something wrong with his head. A neurosurgeon to understand if he actually needs to undergo like surgery dahil kung meron nakita na if there's a mass in his brain or something like that. Doctor ay nag-consult siya. And also, eyes, nose, and throat specialist. Bakit? Kasi meron siyang nararamdaman na ringing in his ears which is somehow connected din dyan sa ENT. And however, as you would notice, dahil itong mga pinuntahan niya na ito, definitely wala silang maisagot as to the causes. So what happened was that he was referred to a therapist. And the therapist, during the course of therapy, it was known that 3 months prior to the consultation, nakita na itong si Gary ay nagkaroon ng talagang napakalaking milestone sa kanyang buhay. Ano yung milestone na yon? Ay ikinasal at yung kasal ay naganap within 3 months after meeting the girl. Remember that? Parang in a way nakikita dito na teka, yun palang mga nararanasan natin na ito, it could be connected to, itong mga nararanasan na symptoms ni Gary, it could be connected to something that happened to his life. Okay? A monumental milestone in his life. Okay? Napansin nyo? And ano yung reason? Because he's experiencing anxiety because he's thinking that he cannot please his wife's family. Kasi nga, sobrang mabilisan nung kanilang pagpapakasal. And based on that particular information, you would look at the physiological symptoms also, you would notice that Gary actually can be diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. Okay? So, The reason why we need to study abnormal psychology based on this particular na example is that it would give you an idea na hindi lahat ng physical symptoms ay nagpapakita or magsasabi na parang yun ay galing sa isang physical na sickness or physiological na sickness. Some of it could be psychological in nature. Okay? So here's another example. You would notice here an example of another male na ang kanyang description is that he's the oldest son and a single parent household, and somehow when he was young talagang he learned to be independent and protective of his siblings, and he's very serious and he lacks sense of humor, and somehow because of that he alienated his siblings because somehow he would like to control them. He's got this desire to control them, and he tends to run his family like much like his mother raised him and his siblings, and he is very rigid in his rules. Okay? Customarily, makikita nyo dito na sasabihin nyo, well, parang protective lang talaga si protective itong lalaki na to. Kasi nga, siya yung oldest, ganyan. Siyempre, lumaki siya, single parent and all, single parent household and all that. However, if this particular behavior also translates into other aspects of his life, like for example, in his work, in the way he manages his things, the way he does his things, and the way he do his job, somehow makikita ninyo that that could be a manifestation of another abnormal behavior. It could be an obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Okay, because of the manifested by rigidity with rules, desire for control or a desire to maintain control over family and people and his environment. Okay, now those are the things that you would notice na talagang napakalawak in a way ng abnormal psychology. It looks into deeper things than what we see on the surface. Okay. Also, you would notice that these particular cases that I gave you, they actually describe real people. And makikita ninyo na parang simple na disorder or simple na mental problem. It could cause a particular disturbance in the life of people or those around him. Imagine yung pangalawang example natin, naaasar na sa kanya yung mga kapatid niya because of what he is, because of his behavior. Okay? Now, in order to fully understand abnormal psychology, definitely we need to define abnormality. And as you see on your screen right now, and also as confirmed by what you would have read, you would see that abnormality has I mean, a lot of people disagrees on what is normal and what is abnormal. So there is no consensus on that. Your view of what is abnormal may be different from my view of what is abnormal. Also, yung abnormal, like 8 months ago, what we may consider abnormal eight months ago, may be considered normal today. Example, during our face-to-face classes, like in January, what if merong biglang pumasok doon na naka-mask and naka-face shield? Definitely, that would be very awkward, and it may be considered as abnormal because everyone else is living like wala namang pandemic or something like that. However, right now, kahit saan kayo magpunta, required yung mga yon. And kapag merong lumabas na walang face mask, walang face shield, ano ang nangyayari? They are considered to be deviant, pasaway, or sometimes abnormal. We can try to look at it in that way. Okay? However, although there is no consensus definition, or a lot of people do not agree on what is normal and what is normal, what we can say is that there are actually some clear elements of what is abnormal. Okay, and these are the elements of abnormality. I would like you to look into them. It would show that these elements of abnormality is not just focused on the person, but also, I mean, on the individual. It's not just focused on the individual. It may also be seen or observed on the people around the individual. Okay? How did I say that? Kasi tingnan nyo ha, elements of abnormality. Suffering, yung first one. Of course, a person with abnormal behavior, particular suffering. Pero yung iba, ini-enjoy nila, like social personality disorder, sometimes because they do not have any idea about their behavior, and somehow they actually enjoy it of being how antisocial is. Okay? So walang suffering doon. Pero karamihan dyan merong suffering. Like if a person has a disorder, person has schizophrenia or Alzheimer's disease or something like that. Another also would be maladaptiveness, like there's a sudden change in the environment, and then the person is not able to adapt properly. Like, eto, nag-new normal tayo, and then we are very much looking into the past. Sabi natin, sana ganun pa rin kagaya nung dati and all that. And we continue to live as if nothing is happening around us, much like the very people that we voted into office. Pero, well, you see, maladaptiveness is actually a sign also, or an element of abnormality. If you cannot adapt to your environment or to the changes in the environment, that may be seen as a particular element of abnormality. Another would be deviancy, or doing things which may be against established rules, okay, or accepted by the society. If we do things that are somehow not within the acceptable behavior by the society. Another would be the violation of the standards, like there are rules, there are law, and then you just love to break all those rules. Yung mga ganyan. Oy, social distancing tayo, pero ay hindi, wala akong pakialam sa social distancing or something like that. Discomfort. This particular aspect or element of abnormality is the one that I was talking about. Abnormality doesn't only affect the individual, but also it could affect the people around the individual. Because, well, imagine if we are in class, in a face-to-face class, and then we are right there, we're talking about abnormal psychology, and then subject, nagtatakbo papasok dun sa classroom and he's not wearing anything. What would you experience? I mean, how would you feel or something like that? Or yung mga napapanood nyo sa social media when you are like riding a bus or something like that. Tapos merong isang tao na sexually deviant at bigla siyang nag-flash or pinakita niya yung kanyang sex organ or something like that. How would you feel? Diba? It would, although you are not the one with the particular disturbance or with a particular abnormal behavior, ang pakiramdam mo rin ay affected. Could you excuse me for a moment? Okay, sorry sa aso. Ayan. Hello, are you still there?
Yes, sir.
Opo.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Medyo daldal lang ako ng daldal kasi dito sa harap ng tapos baka mamaya I may be seen as abnormal by some people who may be observing me. Kasi medyo malikot ako kapag nagsasalita. Anyway, all right, let's continue. As I was saying, social discomfort, abnormal behavior doesn't only affect the individual but also the people around him. And I'm sure na naintindihan nyo na yon, tama? That there are some people that you know, like a close friend, a family, who may be having mental and you would know na pati kayo ay affected. Tama? Halimbawa, merong sobrang depressive, merong suicidal that definitely it would affect you. Um, and you are not the one with the disorder, pero it affects you. So that's what we mean by social discomfort. Another would be irrationality and unpredictability. Well, of course, okay lang naman yung maging ano tayo yung maging, alam niyo yun, you live only once or something, seize the moment, something like that. Be unpredictable or something. However, kapag all the time you are unpredictable, what would happen? It's like the only thing predictable about you is that you would be unpredictable. Well, definitely sometimes it causes a particular distress also. And it could also be a particular symptom of abnormality because, impulsiveness, for example, is a particular, is an element or one of the criterion in one of the disorders that we would be able to see in the future. And another and the last would be dangerousness. Either you may be posing danger to yourself, or you could pose danger to other people. Okay, so you would see those 7: suffering, maladaptiveness, deviancy, violation of the standards of society, social discomfort, irrationality and unpredictability, and dangerousness. You would see that this affects both the individual and also the people around the individual. Okay, however, I would like you, pang break lang natin. Sige, paminsan-minsan, okay lang naman that we can, do some things because it's more fun that way. Pero wag namang abuso, ano? Ayan. In short, guys, meron lang tayong tinatawag na 4 Ds of abnormal behavior. Which is, eto siya, dysfunction, distress, deviance, and danger. If you would notice, these 4 actually corresponds to the 7. Example, balikan natin ha, baka hindi niyo pa nakita mabuti. 4 lang naman, 4 na D. Dysfunction, distress, deviance, danger. Dysfunction, distress, deviance, danger. Okay? Let's look it up. Dysfunction, definitely maladaptiveness. Distress, it could be social discomfort to other people, or it could be suffering to the self. Deviance or deviancy or violations of the standards of society. And also we have danger or dangerousness. Okay, when you violate standards of society, you could also be seen as someone who would be endangering society. Like, for example, what would be our minimum healthy standards right now? You should have ano bang tawag doon? Face mask, face shield, and all that, and maintain proper physical distance with other people. Because if you do not do that and if you do not follow it, somehow you're not just endangering yourself and you may be endangering other people. Okay, so you see that again, para mas madali: dysfunction, distress, deviance, and danger. So dysfunction are behaviors and feelings that interfere with a person's ability to function in daily life. Example natin dito, yung kay Gary kanina na, okay, he's got a good job. The only trouble is that he met a girl, and then after 3 months, they got married and all that. And after they got married, ayun, they need to meet the parents and the family and all that. At ang feeling niya, hindi niya ma-please yung family and parents. Okay? What happens? Nako, ang daming mga symptoms na lumilitaw sa kanya at nagpagamot siya sa ilan: neurologist, neurosurgeon, ENT, chiropractor, therapy. So 5 people, and imagine the time that was consumed for that. Another would be the symptoms that he is experiencing. Definitely kapag nagkaroon siya ng palpitations. Kayo ba pag nagpalpitate yung inyong puso or yung inyong heart, and then suddenly magpapatuloy pa ba kayo sa ginagawa niyo? Of the time, what you do is that you would sit down, you would relax, or something like that. bahala na si Batman dyan sa mga ginagawa nating trabaho or something like that. So somehow, it interrupts your function. Okay? And the worst case of abnormal behavior ay talagang nakaka-disrupt ng ating functioning. Someone who may be suffering from major depressive disorder, alam nyo, itong mga ito halos hindi na maligo, nakatambay na lang sa bahay, nakatanaw sa bintana, umiiyak habang umuulan, or something like that. Okay? And wala na silang ibang gustong gawin sa buhay, lahat ng mga plano nila, parang wala nang silbi ang buhay. Okay? It's a major depressive disorder. It's dysfunction. Another would be distress. So distress may be, it could be physical in nature, like nanginginig kayo, or like the physiological symptoms that we experience, or it could be the feelings, like the feelings that we have, like parang lagi tayong takot, hindi tayo makakilos dahil sa sobrang takot, and because of that, pati yung mga tao sa paligid natin are affected. Deviancy, of course, we know that, like chronic lying or stealing that may lead to judgments of abnormality. Miriam Santiago dyan dati, kanya, the particular former president, kanya, he is actually a pathological liar or something like that. Because they are not able to say anything na talagang within the realm of truth. Another would be dangerousness, okay, which are the behaviors and feelings that are potentially harmful to an individual or to the society in general, or to the people around the individual. So these 4Ds make up mental health professional definition of behaviors or feelings that can be judged as abnormal. However, one thing that I would like to stress is that itong mga ito, hindi mo lang sasabihin na, meron ka ng behavior or something like that. It should be a particular combination of all these things, okay? Or of some of these things. Because if you're dysfunctional, somehow that would cause distress to yourself or to other people. Kasi bigla mong ma-realize, hindi mo na nagagawa yung mga dati mong ginagawa. And then it would cause you distress. If you're deviant, that could cause distress to other people. Or if you're deviant, that could also pose danger to other people. Okay? Another view of abnormality would be statistics, or the statistical view of abnormality. Well, makikita nyo na to, ito yung best friend nyo sa stats, si normal curve. Well, I hope na hindi nyo siya iniwan. Pero, ito si normal curve, at itong symbol na to, I think you know that, standard deviation. Ibig sabihin, yung pinakasukat kung gaano kalayo ang particular na point from the mean. The mean is the zero. Okay? Oh, by the way, hindi nyo pala nakikita yung cursor ko. Sorry naman. Itong mga linya, like that separates the shades of blue na nakikita natin, those represents standard deviations. Okay? Yung 1 and -1, that would indicate 1 standard deviation from the mean, or 1 standard deviation from the norm, and 2 standard deviations from the mean, or 2 standard deviations from the norm. At makikita ninyo, habang lumalayo doon sa gitna or doon sa mean, lumiliit yung shaded part. Meaning that the assumption of normality is that the samples, or majority of the samples, would be very near the normal. Okay? Or nandun sila nagko-congregate sa may average. Pero merong mga pagkakataon na may mga cases na nandoon sa dulong-dulo. Dulo sa kaliwa or dulo sa kanan. And how do we define if that particular case is abnormal or not? Ang standard natin is if it is beyond 2 standard deviations from the norm. Meaning, that would be it's within the rejection region, which is, ano ba yung sinasabi natin dyan, yung dun sa 5% level of significance. If you would remember that, hopefully you remember that. You need to clarify something. Pwede kayong magtanong. Mm-hmm. Anyone? Guys? Naririnig niyo pa ba ako? Kasi it's possible na...
Naririnig naman po, sir.
Narinig pa.
Okay. Is there anything that you would like to clarify? Masyado ba akong mabilis? Am I speaking like an abnormal? Am I speaking abnormally or something like that? How are we? Okay na ba? Can we move on?
Okay na po.
Yes,
po.
sir.
Okay lang po.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sige, ayaw na lumipat nitong aking... Hello. Ayan, nakikita niyo pa to? Nakikita niyo pa yung presentation?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Ayan.
sir.
Yes, sir.
So the points to remember in the elements of abnormality that we presented, not one element is actually sufficient to define or to determine abnormality. So we need to see abnormality as a combination of different elements. So one of the reasons for that is also, by the way, another thought that you need to remember is the definition of deviancy also actually changes based on the way of the society or how society changes. Example there would be during the 1980s or earlier than that, homosexuality is actually seen as quite a deviant behavior. Pero our society right now is somehow medyo accepting na about homosexuality. Dati, nasa DSM yan, pero ngayon ay wala na. So, because the definition of deviant by the society has already changed. Another thing, yung example natin kanina, before the pandemic and then after the pandemic, there may be behaviors before the pandemic which may not be acceptable then, but they will become acceptable right now. Wearing of mask and all that, they are fast becoming acceptable. Okay? So there, because based on the experience of the society, nagbabago din yung ating pananaw ng deviancy. Okay? That's why from time to time ay ang elemento ng abnormality also needs to be reevaluated. All right? Another viewpoint of abnormality would be the DSM-5 definition. Okay? In the DSM-5 is actually the standard in defining various types of mental disorder. So if you would like to see or to understand a particular behavior and then find a course of treatment and all that, or to locate it and to identify it properly and to study it properly, you would need to study or see DSM-5. So in DSM-5, a mental disorder is actually defined as a syndrome. Syndrome. When we mean syndrome, it is a combination of different symptoms. That's a syndrome. Kaya siya sinasabi na yung AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, because the symptoms ay hindi lang iisa kung hindi pinagsama-samang mga symptoms. And then, there, it follows or it shows that particular diagnosis. Okay? So even in our definition of abnormality, we follow that. Definition of abnormality is a syndrome. That's why we need to see the disturbance in behavior, emotions, and the way we regulate our emotions and even our cognitive functioning. We also need to cross-check that with biological and psychological or developmental dysfunction. And then we need to check if those things are associated with distress or disability. Okay? Dito pumapasok yung ating pananaw kanina na, we need to look into the totality of the individual, the biopsychosocial model, the biological, the psychological, and then the social model. Titingnan natin ng buo para ating ma-identify if that person actually exhibits abnormal behavior that may be placed within any diagnosis in the DSM-5. Now, the DSM-5 provides us with a classification of mental disorders. Okay? Now, ang lahat ng mga mental disorders ay kina-classify doon sa DSM-5. So, why do we need to do that? Simple lang naman. So that we would have a nomenclature or a naming system of the disorders. Imagine, kapag wala tayong DSM-5, kapag merong mental problem ang isang tao, ano lang siya, baliw. Lahat ng mga tao na merong mental problem, baliw. Ay baliw yan. Depression, ay baliw yan. May dementia because of ano ba to? Alzheimer's, ay baliw yan. Nakukuha nyo? So, however, since we have a DSM-5, it actually provides us with a naming system and we are able to classify different abnormal behavior based on the syndrome or the symptoms that defines them. Okay? And since meron tayong nomenclature or a naming system, makikita natin na meron tayong individual na treatment for every one of them. Okay? Another is, it could also have a social and political implications. Kasi sa totoo lang, we need to understand that meron tayong tinatawag na people first na language. So when we are talking about certain abnormal behavior, for example, we need to understand that the person who is experiencing that or the individual who is experiencing that is a person as well. And we need to separate the person from the disorder. Okay, let us treat the disorder, but then we need to be really caring and accepting about the person. Okay? And also, nakapaloob dito yung stigma, tinatawag natin na stigma. Okay? And again, another thing would be a classification of mental disorder would actually, it would classify the disorder at yung mga tao ay mare-recognize natin for their humanity. Okay? So, there. However, although okay na magkaroon tayo ng nomenclature or classification, meron pa rin naman siyang disadvantage. Like, for example, you would lose, the information of the individual, or somehow you will not be able to recognize that. Parang lang siya, ay yung meron kang biglang naging patient at ano yung nangyari, ano yung sinabi sa'yo, meron siyang major depressive disorder. Sabi mo, ganun ba? So, ang pumasok sa isip mo agad, yung mga symptoms, yung mga criteria ng major depressive disorder. Pero baka biglang mawala sa paningin mo or sa pananaw mo or in your mind, kung ano yung mga napagdaanan ng tao, bakit kaya na-develop yung ganoong disorder. Like, baka iniwan siya as a child and then he experienced too many losses, or it could be na, some other experiences, or it could be na may mga risk factor talaga. And you focus only on the diagnosis. Okay? And you forget the humanity of the person. So, there. Another would be stigma. Kasi, aminado naman tayo, stigma and stereotyping. Aminado naman tayo na stigma na nakakabit sa na, if you are experiencing suffering, merong mga tao na nagsasabi na ano ka lang, if you're experiencing a mental disorder, minsan sasabihin nila na nag-iinarte ka lang or something else, or it could be na baka nakakahawa, or wag kang lumapit sa pamilya na yan, or wag kang mag-asawa ng anyone belonging to that family kasi may lahi sila or something like that. Those are stigma. Okay? And also stereotyping, like for example, ay nako, may depression yan, any moment yan, magpapakamatay yan or something like that. Those are stereotyping, which is it's very dangerous on the part of the person looking at the disorder, and also on the person with the disorder himself. Another would be our labeling could also impact our self-concept. What would happen? Kasi baka biglang nakafocus tayo dun sa diagnosis sa atin. Biglang sinabi na meron kang early onset na Alzheimer's or something like that. Parang sasabihin mo, oh, wala na akong pag-asa. Or major depressive disorder, ganyan. Ay, naku, ganito na lang ako forever. Wala nang magmamahal sa akin or something. Or siguro kaya ako nagkaganito kasi hindi ako mahal ng Diyos or something like that. So, nakukuha nyo, dahil na-label ka and you somehow embrace that label, and then it affected your self-concept. However, these disadvantages these disadvantages of classifications would actually pose, we can mitigate them by making a particular, creating awareness for mental health disorder para matanggal or mabawasan natin paunti-unti itong mga negative na classifications, negative na itong mga disadvantages na to. Meaning that by understanding how to treat people, you would need to understand na you need to recognize them as people also. Na also, wag na yung bang lumayo-layo tayo doon sa pag-stigmatize or pag-stereotype ng mga tao. Kasi alam natin that each mental disorder is unique in itself. Another would be, a mental health problem is manageable as much as possible. Most of them are manageable. So it's not good that we would actually be hopeless at a particular time if we developed a particular disorder. There. So this is actually an important question. How would we reduce prejudicial attitude towards the mentally ill? Well, most of the time, simple lang naman yan, ay, ano ba tawag dito? By creating awareness, okay? Educating people, okay? If you have some other answers, you can actually put it in your learning memo, okay? Para mabasa ko siya. Nagmamadali ako mag-ano dito ha. Talagang sinusulit ko yung oras kasi itong introduction pa lang natin ang haba-haba na nito. Pero in the future, nakipag-deal ako doon sa kabilang section. If they would like another synchronous session, I am actually willing to do that. Basta yung mga panahon na, basta ipa-schedule niyo sa akin ahead of time. Okay? And I'll be willing to do that. All right. So, does culture affect our what we consider to be abnormal? Definitely yes, because there are presentations of disorders that are found worldwide, meaning they are observed around the world. Depressive disorder is actually observed among people of different races, of different culture. However, meron din naman na mga certain forms of disorders or mental disorders that are culture-specific. Ano yung mga example niyan? Example is in Japan and in the Caribbean or, in the Latin American countries. In Japan, meron tinatawag na Taijin Kyofusho. Itong Taijin Kyofusho ay isa siyang disorder wherein a particular individual actually thinks that a part of his body is offensive to other people. Example, kung ako meron yan, and then ang focus ko ng trouble is my hand, parang ang iisipin ko, nako, hindi dapat makita ng mga tao itong kamay ko kasi it's offensive to them or it causes distress to them. O may sariling buhay itong kamay na to or something like that. And in the extreme cases, baka some people out that particular something like that. It is observed in Japan. Another is atake de nervios in the Caribbean. Itong atake de nervios, parang, well, ano ba to? Nakikita natin to sa mga sa mga telenovela, kahit sa mga Pilipino. Yung mga biglang nag-hysterical na mga nanay. Gano'n. Ano yung mga symptoms niya? Sobrang nagpapalpitate like a heart attack. Nagpapalpitate yung puso like a heart attack. They have like, sweat all over and all that. So, but then it's a culture-specific disorder. However, maaari din naman nating makita, baka most prevalent lang siya sa Caribbean, pero dito ay nararanasan din natin, but then it's not that, the population is not that, the number is not that significant. Kaya siya na tatawag na culture-specific at this time. Okay. I think, para mapahinga ako ng konti, can I call some people para magsagot na any of these 3 questions? Kapag ka nasagot yung isa, pwedeng sumagot yung iba ng yung another point. Okay? Another question. Can we have a volunteer in 5 seconds? Kung walang volunteer, I'm going to call someone. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Number
Ayan,
one
si
na po.
Caleb.
So, para sa answer kasi, what makes defining abnormality difficult kasi sir yung yung fact na hindi universal yung pagtingin natin sa kung ano yung possible cases ng yung possible things na pwede mag-define ng isang abnormality. Especially sa kaka-discuss nyo lang sir na there are certain abnormalities na culturally bound. So, from one culture to another, siguro hindi ganun kadaling makita na parang sa culture nila, it's abnormal, pero para sa inyo, it's nothing new, na parang normal lang
Yeah.
siya. So, parang somehow nagiging subjective din yung term ng abnormality in certain cases siguro.
Yeah.
Okay. Tapos yung naman, characteristics sir, yung tulad ng pinakita nyo kanina, tsaka yung 4Ds, siguro yun na lang yung part kung saan pwede mag-agree in a objective manner para
Yeah.
define yung abnormality. Yun lang po.
All right, thank you. Who's next? Ayun, merong nag-open ng mic. Sino kaya yun? Hi. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wala.
Sige, sir, ako.
Yes, Joanna.
Sir, yung what is stigma po? Parang yung stigma po kasi, sir, in a more easy words, parang isa po siyang disapproval or discrimination against a person based on perceivable social characteristic na nagdi-distinguish kung ano yung normal sa other members ng society tsaka kung ano yung sa hindi. Yung how common is it, parang in an everyday life, makakakita po tayo ng stigma. Hindi lang po sa mental health or sa mental ill, kundi po pati sa simpleng mga bagay. For example, sir, pag mataba ka, parang ang stigma sa mga mataba, parang isipin nila, naku, kaya niya ubusin lahat yan, di yan magkakasakit kasi mataba naman siya, healthy siya. Parang ganun,
Okay.
sir. Yung
Sige.
mga challenges naman po, sir, sa reducing stigma is, hindi, yung ibang tao po, sir, hindi po sila open pag in-inform sila or pag na-call out sila na ganito yung problema, ganito mo dapat siya tignan, ganito yung tama. Parang lagi nilang iisipin na meron akong sariling stand, may bilang yung opinion ko or entitled ako sa bagay na to. Ganun, sir.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Siguro yung pangatlo para so we can move along. Ayan, si Sarmiento, Enrico.
Sir, what if yung um, maraming terminologies sa paggamit ng clinical diagnosis is rooted sa culture. Pero yun
Mhm.
pala, based sa repeated research, yung term na ginagamit is inadequate and could not satisfy it.
Oh, okay. What are we trying to answer? Is this any of the questions, or is that a question?
Question. But if ano nga lang, yung mga terms na rooted sa culture
Mm-hmm.
could not satisfy could not satisfy in how we define.
Abnormality.
Yes, sir.
Well, actually, meron tayong doon sa DSM-5, if you would look at the back part of the DSM-5, meron doon emerging researches eh. Makikita natin yun in the future. Mga parang ito yung mga cases or cases under investigation, parang gano'n. Sorry, I forgot the particular text. Kasi sabi nga natin, ang ating pananaw, ang ating society, and our views and our culture is not rigid. It's actually fluid, pabago-bago siya. So even our diagnosis would have to understand na yung mga pagbabago, dun sa mga pagbabago na yun ay maaaring makaapekto on how we view mental disorder in the future as well. Okay, so there are some things na hindi talaga masasatisfy. Like here in the Philippines, meron tayong mga disorders na, baka hindi talagang pasok na pasok dito sa DSM-5. But then, you see, we can look into that in the future, and that would be subject to future researches.
Thank you,
So,
sir.
all right, we have little less than 20 minutes. So magtuloy ko na ha para makapag-ano tayo. Hopefully ay ma-tackle natin hanggang sa research. So how common? This question is actually it goes into the point of studying mental disorders. Why do we need to answer this question? The reason is that we need to know how common are mental disorders or specific mental disorders for that matter para at least mag-guide yung ating public policy in handling those particular disorders. Okay? And also when we know the how common a particular mental disorder is, nagkakaroon tayo ng mas maraming clue and idea kung ano yung nagkukos ng disorder na yon. Would it be the environment? Would it be culture in general? Or could it be a particular thing that na nakasanayan ng specific na mga grupo ng mga tao? Okay? And this is actually the concept bakit tayo kahit sa COVID actually di ba sabi ng mga kailangan mass testing, tracing, ganyan. Kasi we need to understand how common. We need to see the numbers para kapag nakita natin yung numbers, makapagplano tayo ng maigi. And that is the reason why hanggang ngayon parang wala tayong plano because we do not know how common it is. Okay? Kasi hindi natin alam yung extent. We have a particular suspicion kung ano yung, kung ano yung kakulangan or something like that. Okay? Is actually answered by our studies that are focused on epidemiology of a particular disorder or disease. Okay? Epidemiology is the study of distribution of diseases, whether in percentage or in a specific population or in a particular number of people. Okay? And ang pagsukat natin doon sa epidemiology is through prevalence or incidence. Ang prevalence usually is measured by percentage. Example, COVID-19. Ano yung prevalence niya? Ipaparis natin like total number of population that are affected by COVID-19. In the Philippines, there are around how many? Like 100 million people, and there are 200,000 cases as of right now. So that would be, well, kung ilang percentage man yun. Di ko siya makompute na. 100 million. Anyway, so 0.2% or something like that. Okay? And also, makikita natin parang ang konti-konti, ano? Eh, hindi. Less than 1% lang naman yan. Pero kapag tinignan natin, in the level of incidence, it's already staggering. Okay? Parang, ay, ang dami pala. Okay? Kaya titingnan nyo ang statistics and also the way we present our data could also confuse people. Kapag nirepresent natin sa percentage, wow, ang konti, less than 1%. Kapag nirepresent natin sa number, wow, ang dami-dami, 200,000 or something like that. So how many have depression? Dati, sinasabi around 33% of college students may experience major depressive disorder or something like that. Or nung ako ay nag-graduate school somewhere, ang sinasabi, majority of students in graduate programs are actually having mental health issues. Well, you see, when we say majority, ibig sabihin more than 50%. Okay? So, yung pagkakaiba ng prevalence and incidence. Again, it depends on how you present the data that you, okay? In studying mental disorder, ano yung category, and pinaka-common dyan, definitely yung mga mood disorders. And also most common individual disorders. Tignan nyo, merong individual kasi merong mga pagkakataon na yung disorder is somehow shared. And kung ano yung comorbidity nila, ibig sabihin, meron akong particular na disorder tapos meron pa siyang kakambal. Okay? Parang nung umulan ng mental health disorder, parang naligo ako sa ulan or something like that. So there. Now, another would be treatment. This is one of the biggest issues lalo na dito sa Pilipinas. Like for example, yung buhangin doon sa Manila Bay and all that, and then they are being compared to, you know, how SMH is being treated. Sa totoo, napaka-konti ng ating napaka-konti ng support natin pagdating sa mental health. To the point that not all people are actually receiving treatment. And coupled with that, the stigma that people with mental health disorder actually experience. Yung mga iba, they would just, you know, hayaan na lang natin dito sa bahay kasi nakakahiya kapag malaman pa ng ibang tao or something like that. Also, there are vast majority of treatment that are done on outpatient basis. And yung mga hospitalization naman, typically in psychiatric units, and they are not that pleasant. Lalo na kapag ikaw ay you know, wala kang pera or something. I think nakita niyo naman yung mga pictures ng NCMH, and in the future you will be there, hopefully not as a patient, pero joke lang. Not as a patient, but as interns. Okay? So there. The different types of mental health professionals, okay na yan, alam niyo na yan. Research approaches. We have 10 minutes. There are 3 main types of research approaches. And this would actually help you understand abnormal behavior in all their, you know, it will make you understand abnormal behavior and the etiology or kung paano siya nabubuo at kung paano siya nagpo-progress at kung gaano siya ka-prevalent in a particular population. And this continuous research in abnormal psychology and in abnormal behavior would actually reduce error in our intervention. Kasi habang nakaka-collect tayo ng mas maraming data, definitely mas nagiging mas nagiging informed at meron tayong nakikita na iba't ibang mga insights at nagkakaroon tayo ng ideya on how to manage a particular mental health problem. What are the different sources of information or the usual research methods that are being used? We use case studies. We use self-report data and observational approaches. Ano yung case study? I'm sure you're already familiar, but then let's check it out. So in case studies, we, of course, study a specific individual, usually one individual, across a long time during the progression of the particular behavior or variable that we are observing. Okay? Um, this particular method of research may be subject to bias kasi baka meron na tayong preconceived notion as a researcher. So you need to understand that your bias could also determine kung paano kayo tumingin sa isang specific na behavior. That's why kahit na case study ang research natin, sometimes most of the time it is better that you do it as a team. And then you observe or you actually do the study from different viewpoints, and then you would come up with a consensus later on para ma-reduce yung bias. And case studies actually has low generalizability in a way kasi isa lang yung in-observe natin or very few people. So definitely, hindi natin masasabi na ito ay, yung results ng research natin ay applicable to others. However, the importance of a case study is that it gives you a very good nuance of what abnormality is. Nakikita natin yung parang peculiarities ng isang abnormal behavior. Okay? It's not generalizable, but then it would give you a lot of insight when it comes to how we view abnormal behavior. Okay? And then next would be self-report data. As a psych student, I'm sure naging bahagi na kayo ng mga surveys and all that, interviews coming from the higher years in the past. So makikita natin na sa mga self-report data, what is done is that kayo mismo ang hinihinga ng information. Kayo mismo ang nagsusupply ng information using either interview or questionnaire. The problem with this is that it may be inaccurate. Ano yung reason? Because some of the respondents may be faking good or some of them may be faking bad. Something like, gusto kong may pakita na I'm well, I'm okay, and all that. So, sasagot ako according to that particular bias. Or gusto kong maipakita na ako ay, that I need help. So, sasagot ako compared as nang naaayon doon sa particular na pananaw ko na yon. So, it may be inaccurate. However, the good point when it comes to self-report data is that it would actually give you the point of view of the person. Lalo na kapag interview yan. Okay, makikita mo yung particular, specific na point of view niya. Another is that you can actually do this with a larger population. Hence, mas generalizable yung findings mo if you do the research well or the data gathering properly. Okay? And the last for our discussion on research would be the observational approaches. Observational approaches, we collect information without asking participants directly for it. In their natural environment, titignan lang natin sila. And yung mga outward behavior can be observed directly. And some of the other aspects of the individual, like the biological aspects of the individual, can be done or can be observed via technologically advanced methods, like CT scan, MRI, and all that. Okay, so there are three main ways on how we do research in abnormal psychology, which is case study, self-report, and then observational approaches. But our researches are not limited on those three. Okay? Of course, I'm sure that this, dito sa part na to ay nakikita nyo na yung last time ninyo in experimental psychology wherein you would formulate hypotheses, ganyan. I would just like to remind you that our hypothesis ay hindi lang siya hinuhugot mula sa hangin. Okay? Ito ay nagmumula sa ating sa information na na-encounter natin in the past. It could be some anecdotal accounts, or it could be unusual research findings like biglang kakaiba na research kakaiba talaga yung result niya, and then that would manganak ng another hypothesis, or it could be some identified na future directions of different researches that a particular researcher has done. Kaya nga sa mga thesis ninyo, merong, or kung nagbabasa kayo ng thesis, meron kayong makikita doon na recommendations to future researchers. Ganyan-ganyan. Sasabihin na could focus on the possibility of blah, 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 blah. Ganyan. So you could form a hypothesis based on that. You need to do with the hypothesis. Definitely, you need to test it in a well-designed research study. Okay, so who would you include in your study? This particular question will be answered by our sampling and generalization. And I'm sure that you were able to talk about this in your statistics class, or if not in statistics, definitely in your research class, or if not in research class, definitely in your what do you call that? Experimental psychology and field methods. So ano yung mga ito? Sino nga ba ang kailangan nating isama sa mga researches natin? Definitely, we can include people who are similar in their behavioral abnormalities. Like if you are looking into Alzheimer's, you can gather as participants in your research people who may be exhibiting symptoms of Alzheimer's, or who may have Alzheimer's, or people who would be living with people with Alzheimer's, and so on, and behavior. Again, we should also have include a particular study group, and then people who doesn't exhibit the abnormal behavior. We can also include them so that we would have a particular baseline on what we may consider as normal. And the most ideal setup would be a large randomly selected groups. Okay? Para magkaroon tayo ng mas mataas na generalized. This one, I understand you talked about this in your abnormal, ano bang tawag doon? Experimental psychology class. If a particular research is externally valid, it's more generalizable. If it is internally valid, definitely it is sound when it comes to the methods that were used in that particular research. Do you have a class at 6 p.m.?
Meron po ata, sir, pero di namin sure, sir, kung magsisimula.
Okay. Sige, ano na lang. I think gagawin natin. Pansin ko kasi talaga hindi kasya ang discussion sa isang ano lang. In the future, perhaps, kagaya ng binanggit ko dun sa kabilang klase, I could record some of the sessions and I would upload it sa Google Classroom, so that kahit na hindi synchronous yung session natin, at least you will be able to watch the discussion. And also, you may have the option to request for another synchronous class if you would prefer to have that. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, just let me know through your class monitor or representative. So it's already 5:59, and I hope na may natutunan kayo ngayon. And if you have questions, you can put it in your learning memo. And I'm going to try to check them kapag ka naibigay ninyo lang mas maaga yung inyong mga learning memo. Are we okay?
Yes po.
All right, so I'll see you next time.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. And thank you for joining
Thank
me
you, sir.
in
Thank
this
you, sir.
particular session.
Thank you po, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you po.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Salamat.